but she almost always went to do this with Ivana Trump, Trump's ex-wife. These elites aren't loyal to the nations they live in. They're loyal to their ruling class. Like this.
Is billionaire philanthropy actually an operation to launder their reputations? When Bill Gates said, "We can reduce the population with vaccines," what did he really mean? Why were vaccines rejected in the U.S., tested on young girls in India? Are the world's richest people establishing a monopoly over the future of humanity? Investigative journalist Whitney Webb exposes the shocking plans of the global elite.
All right, so Bill Gates is one of those billionaires who had a ton of money, and it took him a really long time to get involved in philanthropy. But not just speaking about Bill Gates, but so-called philanthropists in general. Since the day of the very first billionaire in the United States, John D. Rockefeller, they have tried to rebrand themselves as philanthropists. Even Jeffrey Epstein, before he was arrested the first time, used to be called philanthropist. It's been used a lot of times to basically launder a person's reputation when they get involved in odd or unsavory activities, which billionaires, we've seen over the years sometimes are prone to do, right? So as far as Gates goes, a lot of people have compared his foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, to the Rockefeller Foundation, sort of as the successor to that, even though that foundation still exists in a lot of ways, focusing a lot of attention on developing countries, and some of those things that have happened, and scandals with the vaccines and all of that with Bill Gates has to do with the fact that his foundation has a lot of close ties to major pharmaceutical giants, and in some cases, some of those vaccines that were originally rejected for use in the United States ended up being sent abroad to other countries, developing countries like India, for example, where they ended up having really severe health effects on largely the girls that received them. And a lot of other controversies. I mean, vaccines in general, there's, a lot of people get really agitated when people bring up vaccines, but it's important to remember that, there can be some vaccines that are produced poorly or produced, for example, in a facility that is not up to standards and has sanitary issues, for example. And then when those vaccines are used, that can cause adverse reactions. And that is, a crime, essentially, and wrong. And there can be people that can talk about pharmaceutical corruption and not necessarily be against vaccines as a science. And what we see a lot of times is this conflation of people saying, oh, you're criticizing this particular vaccine or this particular pharmaceutical company or this particular vaccine manufacturer, you must be against all vaccines. And I don't think that's true at all. But in terms of Bill Gates, one thing I do want to point out about him is that his rhetoric over the years has been very odd when it comes to vaccines. He says, stuff at these TED Talks like, we can, bring down the world population by, if we're good on vaccines and stuff like that. And that's kind of odd, right? Presumably vaccines exist to keep people alive longer, not to reduce population. So the fact that he's talking about it that way, I think it's reasonable that people are concerned about that, especially
According to Whitney Webb, Gates's contradictory statements linking vaccines to population control are raising legitimate public concern. This calls into question the tech billionaire's massive influence over global health policy and the true motivations behind that influence.
Considering, too, that he's talked about for years that he's concerned that the global population is too large, specifically in Africa. A few years ago, he was saying that he was very concerned and bothered by how many the African youth boom is the term used in the report there. And I just don't really understand why we have to be putting, trotting out this billionaire on CNN and stuff telling us how to respond to this crisis. When he doesn't have a medical degree, he's a guy that didn't even finish university. He dropped out of Harvard and then went on and became this, tech guy, massive tech billionaire because he got this deal with IBM in the 80s and all this stuff, right? But why is he giving medical advice on a massive scale? I mean, it just seems really odd. But the thing, to me, that's the biggest red flag about Gates is his relationship with Epstein. And I say this for a couple of reasons, mainly that if you look at who was one of the executors on Epstein's will, it was a guy named Boris Nikolic, who was actually Bill Gates' chief scientific advisor. There's pictures of Nikolic, Gates, and Epstein, also Larry Summers, all together palling around. And it came out, after last year, after the second Epstein arrest last year, that Epstein was very interested in eugenics. Right. I mean, this was openly admitted in mainstream media. And what I was told, what we're going to get into today about Epstein by one of his victims, is that they talked about eugenics all the time and talked about the superiority of races and how other races are lesser than others. And she was like, this is how these people think. They talk to me like this. They told me I was lesser than them, because I didn't have their DNA.
How close were Gates and Epstein personally?
Well, so there has been a huge cover up on Gates and Epstein ties. I can say that for a fact, because the New York Times, originally it said like they had met in 2016. And then the New York Times said, oh, no, actually, it was 2011. But that's a lie. And I know this because there is this article they have tried to scrub from the internet, but you can still find it if you're, persistent like I am. It's from the Evening Standard, a UK newspaper. It's from January 2001. It was written by Nigel Rosser. And in there, it talks about a whole bunch of stuff about Epstein. Of course, this was before he was controversial, right? So it says a lot of things about Epstein. It even mentions the intelligence ties. It says CIA. It says Mossad in this article, right? But one sentence that really caught my attention was Jeffrey Epstein made his millions, all his
asset of either a foreign intelligence service or our intelligence service.
She said that he's Mossad. That's what she said.
Right. It does.
He's part of the mob, like the mafia.
Right.
She said it was like organized crime. And, in my series, I point that out, too, that he, has basically documented ties to the National Crime Syndicate, which is the Jewish and Italian mafia. They started their union in the 1920s, and they've pretty much been blackmailing ever since. And they got in bed with the OSS, the precursor to the CIA. And then after the CIA was made, they got in bed with them. And that's where all of this has really come from. Right. So Wexner's, a part of that, and he's been carrying this on. But every time she would bring him up, they would cut it out. They don't want to go after Wexner. But, if he's the head of this, it won't stop until there's some accountability for him. But apparently, because he's the richest man in Ohio, no one wants to say anything. And I think that's sick.
Absolutely. What did she say about Ghislaine Maxwell?
Webb places Ghislaine Maxwell at the center of the investigation, emphasizing she wasn't just a facilitator, but a key operator intertwined with international intelligence networks. Maxwell's father's past and her own loyalties reveal just how deep this network truly runs.
What's her role in this, and where does she think she is now, or...
Well, she said Ghislaine Maxwell is the most dangerous woman she thinks she's ever met and the most dangerous asset for Israel. That's a direct quote. She said that. And she said that Ghislaine Maxwell talked about Israel and said that she and Wexner and Epstein were not loyal to the United States. They were loyal to Israel. I mean, they straight up told her that. She had passports, Ghislaine did, for like 5 different countries, including Israel, the United States, the United Kingdom, France. This woman was balls deep in intelligence. And of course, anyone that looks at her father knows this. Ghislaine also told her that she believes her father was murdered by Israeli intelligence, but then given a state funeral because of his importance, right? Among other things. But she said Ghislaine is a dangerous, very dangerous woman, but didn't have a lot of friends. So the people she would treat as, her servants, her employees, she ended up trying to share information about herself. She'd have her go shopping with her, sit her down and go through photo albums of her childhood. She had 12 photo albums of her growing up with the royal family. That has not been mentioned in mainstream media. They claim the Prince Andrew ties were in the late 90s with Ghislaine Maxwell. She says, no way. They were really young in these pictures, and there were photo album after photo album.
Wow.
Of them. Yeah.
When you say dangerous woman, is it farmers that Ghislaine could make people disappear? That she could, did Farmer suggest that there were certain girls or victims that she used to see around that she doesn't see around anymore? Was there anything of that nature discussed?
Well, on the last point, she didn't say Ghislaine. She didn't talk about Ghislaine murdering anyone per se, but she definitely does think that there were a lot of kids that ended up dying. that got recruited. We can go into that later. But in terms of what Ghislaine Maxwell was doing, she said that she one day went to her art portfolio because she was recruited to work for Epstein. She was basically forced to work for Epstein because of the dean of the school, the art school she was going to in New York, basically said, "Oh, you're going to work for these guys," basically, and that's why she was there. So she had this art portfolio. Depends on how you define cool.
No, I said what school? School, not that's cool.
Oh, what school?
Yeah.
Sorry, it came through and I was like,
No.
No, it was the New York Academy of Art, and the woman that was the dean, the head of the school at the time was a woman named Eileen Guggenheim. And there's pictures of her with this lady, Marina Abramovich, pictures of her with the Clintons.
At this point in the podcast, I do want to say that myself, neither you are suicidal.
No, not at all.
Okay, just want to let everyone know that.
I intend to take these people to town.
Yeah.
Because the fact that mainstream media would not report this, and it's my job now.
Yeah.
Webb points to the evidence ignored by mainstream media and the FBI. The focus now shifts to the horrifying events inside the Ohio estate of alleged financier Les Wexner. Through the first-hand testimony of survivor Maria Farmer,
the FBI knew all this stuff in 1996.
Jesus.
And most of mainstream media knew this in the early 2000s. Vicky Ward knew all this stuff.
So the Guggenheim owned school in Manhattan, or she's the principal or somebody, tells Maria that you are now going to work for Jeffrey Epstein.
Basically, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And as what? As an assistant? As a masseuse?
She ended up doing like interior decorating and stuff like that for all these apartments, because they had this whole apartment building that's officially owned by Epstein's brother, where like all these girls were kept. There were so many places. There were so many buildings. And they had offices. They didn't just have these apartments. Yeah. They had offices where Epstein worked. Ghislaine had offices. Just tons of real estate.
How many women are we talking about, girls, at any given time?
Maria, this was in 1995 to 1996. She said that she saw between at least 5 different girls a day come in and out of Epstein's offices.
Okay, so he's running a global operation.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
I have some audio clips from the. Let me tell you. I'll try and summarize her story, and when you hear it, you will realize why the mainstream media will not tell her story, because it happened. The worst of it happened at Wexner's house.
Okay. In
New Albany, Ohio. Right. So obviously, if they were to talk about it in any sort of detail, they'd have to talk about Wexner. Right.
Right.
So at some point while she was working for Epstein, she was basically told, "Oh, Abigail Wexner, that's Leslie Wexner's wife, wants an artist in residence," and she was basically, told it would be great and she could go eat at this country club. Go play tennis there, and it was going to be all nice, and there was this big estate, and there were horses. I don't know. So she ends up going. She stays in his guest house. It has, just like all these other residences, all these cameras everywhere. They watch her every move. She has to call Abigail Wexner or someone to get permission to leave the house, to even go outside and like sit on the porch. This country club she tried to go, and she was told that she wouldn't be served because she's not Jewish.
Interesting.
Which is weird. But apparently she said all these people, like Ghislaine, all these people would just tell her they were like really supremacist. I don't know. So apparently she said that didn't surprise her based on everything else she experienced around these people. But at some point, she was there for 3 months, and they really limited the amount of food they gave her. She felt like she was being starved, she said, which is disturbing. So she was basically trapped there, Epstein and Ghislaine came, I think, 3 to 4 times during her 3-month stay there. And on the last stay, they tried to rape her. Both of them.
Both of them tried
Maxwell
to rape her.
and Epstein. Mm-hmm.
And what happened then?
Well, so when we talked, she jumped around a lot from different topics, from this to that. From what I understand, after that, they ended up leaving. She called the police, and the police basically said they weren't going to come help her because they work for Wexner. They work at his gate at the estate, and to like stop calling, basically.
And how old was she when this was happening?
She was an adult, but I don't know how. The thing is, she was an adult when this happened, but they took her sister. They kidnapped her sister, and she was like 15.
When did they kidnap her sister?
I'd have to look back at my notes because it's a long story. I mean, 3.5 hours.
No,
right?
of course.
Just yesterday.
Yeah.
Right? But I mean, the mainstream media, the New York Times, basically makes the story sound like, oh, she went to Wexner's house to paint a mural, and Epstein hired her, and then Epstein tried to put his hands on her, and then she called the cops, and that was it.
Right.
No, and apparently at some point, this bodyguard for Wexner, who's former like special forces military guy, who's now Will Smith's bodyguard, he basically came over and was like, you're never leaving here, and was like, basically like, I'm going to kill you. And the only reason she said she made it out is because there was a landline in that house, and she called literally everyone she had ever met in her entire life.
Wow.
Her whole family, as many people as she could, saying they are trying to kill me.
Now,
and because they saw her making a stink with all these cameras, they ended up letting her go. And she said to me, I was an adult at the time. What if I had been one of those preteen girls or one of those younger kids? What would have happened to me?
Did she ever see any notable people, any bold-faced names with Epstein and Ghislaine that would be surprising to anybody?
Oh, yeah. One thing that shocked me, honestly, is that she said that in New York, Ghislaine would go to these around the time school would get out to like middle schools. She would like drive around and say that she was recruiting models for Victoria's Secret, and would go up to like all these 12-year-old girls with like braces and stuff in school uniforms. But she almost always went to do this with Ivana Trump, Trump's ex-wife. And said that they were together all the time in this, going around in cars, talking to these young girls, and that they would exchange information. And the next day those girls would be in Epstein's office.
So she would go around to, I imagine, were these prep schools? Are these public? I mean,
I don't know exactly what type of school it was. But
it's hard to imagine that they're going to very wealthy schools, because then the parents of those kids would also be sort of powerful and connected people. But who knows? Who knows? But so she was going to junior high schools, middle schools with Ivana Trump, and saying she was recruiting girls for Victoria. Wait, what was she recruiting girls for?
Ghislaine told Maria, because Maria would come along in the car, they'd be like, come with us.
According to Webb's analysis, the network's recruitment methods included shocking tactics like using Donald Trump's ex-wife, Ivana. What's more disturbing, however, are the powerful names, including the Clintons, that victims reported to the FBI years ago.
They, first of all, never offered me witness protection. And when I first called them, they knew I was telling. Believe me, they knew they knew everything I was telling them. They already knew, because they're in on it. And it was so weird, his reactions when I was talking to him. I called and I got some answer guy, and then he passes me to some guy who's like, when I start talking about Wexner, and I asked the guy, do you have, this is all over the phone, in 1996. I said, do you have a file on Les Wexner? And he said, why? And I said, he's the head of the snake in this, in America. And I don't even know I was intuiting this. And also, I think it's common sense when you see all this stuff going on. And anyway, when I said that to him, he said, yeah, I don't know, maybe we do. And I said, well, these people are using child pornography, and they've stolen photographs of my sisters. That right there would have been life in prison for Jeffrey and Ghislaine. I still have the envelopes with their touch DNA and fingerprints on them, and the FBI will not take them from me. They never would. They would never take the envelopes that they stole. I mean, they photographs out of these envelopes, and I have proof. I still have the envelopes, Whitney. And the FBI was like, yeah, no, we don't need that. They also knew in 1996 that I'd been trafficked and Annie had been trafficked, and that would have been enough to put them away. But they never cared. They didn't care. And the worst part was I named everybody. I named Donald Trump. I named everyone who I thought was a co-conspirator at the time. So I named Alan Dershowitz, Donald Trump, Absolutely the Clintons. These are people that I saw coming and going, that I knew were part of it. And I made it really clear that this is a very scary thing for children, and that I see between 5 and 10 girls a day going upstairs. And now that I know what's happening to them, I want it stopped. And
that's where it's supposed to go.
Yeah. I mean, this is just mind-blowing stuff. When she says that she tells the FBI that, she has information on people that are trafficking children and they do nothing. And we've heard this before. We heard it with the Franklin scandal. There's been many other pedophile rings in the UK, the Kincora Boys Home in the UK, North Fox Island, another much smaller, but also wealthy, powerful people abusing children. The Franklin scandal is the big, from the 80s and 90s, is the huge precursor to Epstein, where you had a very politically connected figure doing the same exact thing. What is your belief when you zoom out for a minute and you look at this from 30,000 feet? And what does this say about our society? What does it say about the ruling class? What does it say about elites? What does it say about how people are controlled? What does it say to you after looking at all this stuff? What can you extract from this and apply it to like kind of an overarching thesis of what's going on that we don't really know about?
Oh, wow. Okay. So this is definitely global in scale, number one. I think a lot of these elites aren't loyal to the nations they live in. They're loyal to their ruling class. Like, this is a supranational, swamp, basically. You know how people in the U.S. are calling, the deep state, the swamp? I mean, I feel like, there's a lot of billionaires that have this sort of supranational structure, and they're just in it to do this sick stuff, because Leslie Wexner is not the only billionaire that's into this.
Right.
I can say that for a fact.
When we hear people talk about the occult and that a lot of these people are just into strange, weird, ancient religions and weird types of ceremonies and things like that.
According to Whitney Webb, the Epstein scandal reveals a global elite class loyal not to nation-states, but only to its own interests. Webb argues this same structure is now using the coronavirus crisis as a pretext to impose pre-planned mass surveillance systems on society.
How much?
But in terms of coronavirus, some of the reporting I've done in recent weeks has really shown that a lot of the solutions for coronavirus that we're being told we need to, these systems, like these surveillance systems we have to implement, these were planned out last year, months ago.
Yeah.
For example, this coronavirus surveillance system, they were promoting this under a different name called Safe Home, under this agency they wanted to make called HARPA. It was Ivanka Trump promoting that. Now Jared Kushner is promoting this thing today in his new task force or whatever. But last year they were saying it needed to be done to stop mass shootings.
And what
they are doing is they are taking these solutions that they want to implement, and they're just tacking on whatever Americans are most afraid of.
What is this
It was
surveillance?
mass shootings.
Yeah.
Now it's coronavirus.
What is this surveillance system, though? What are they trying to do? What are they going to try to do?
Well, they're basically trying to get Americans' private medical records in a giant database mixed with everything that's on your consumer smartphone, and use it to make sure you're not social distancing and all this stuff. But it's definitely more than that, and I'll tell you why. Because last October, Bill Barr, the Attorney General, created a pre-crime program that started this year. It's called DEEP, the Disruption and Early Engagement Program. He created it last year, saying that this was supposed to be to stop mass shootings. And it's pre-crime. Because the idea behind it is that you arrest someone who's mobilizing towards violence, and the way you do it is by looking at their health records and what they say on social media, and that you arrest them before they can strike. Right? That's pre-crime, and that is a slippery slope. And after coronavirus and all these lockdowns happens, Bill Barr's Department of Justice asked for the right to indefinitely detain Americans without trial. He hasn't gotten them yet, but he might. And to think that this whole surveillance dragnet they're not going to be pushing through, it's crazy. I have another report coming out next week about this little-known U.S. government body called the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. It's chaired by Eric Schmidt. formerly the head of, Alphabet, Google's parent company, and is full of all these like CIA guys, Pentagon guys. And basically what they say in this document that just came out last year that no one's reporting on, which is insane, they basically say in order for the U.S. as for national security purposes, we have to maintain a technological advantage over China in artificial intelligence. And the way to do that is to remake American society so that we adopt a Chinese style like surveillance state, but worse than what China has.
Wow.
That's basically what they say.
And where
is scandalous.
Where is this coming out of again?
I'll send it to you. It came out as a Freedom of Information Act request. Just like a couple days ago, no one's covered it, and it is just the most scandalous document. And it's insane.
And they're saying,
and it totally is the opposite of the rhetoric we are hearing about. The social credit score and China's abusing human rights. They are literally saying we have to do that here, or we will not be able to set international norms and not be able to control the market of the fourth industrial revolution that AI is going to create and all this stuff.
Webb reveals a plan based on a leaked government document for the U.S. to build a surveillance society more totalitarian than China's in order to compete. This plan involves eliminating legacy systems like cash, private car ownership, and even in-person shopping.
And they're basically saying we have to eliminate individual car ownership. We have to eliminate cash and credit cards. You can't even see, they call all of these things legacy systems. Wow. That's basically the American way of life. No more in-person shopping. You have to do it all online.
And this is so fucking nuts, because this is nuts. What I was talking about and these are people that are saying in order to beat China, we have to become China.
Yeah, that's what they're saying. They're saying China is going to leapfrog us and go miles ahead in adoption of these technologies unless we do what they're doing and we do it faster. And we have to leapfrog them, basically.
And
they're basically using this pandemic to do that, to remake society. They're doing this controlled demolition of the economy, and they're not going to reopen it up until they remake everything, I think.
Wow.
Based on the stuff that they've been saying.
This is very disturbing. So they want to get rid of a lot of these legacy systems.
That's what they call it.
Yeah.
Like going to a store in person and buying stuff, legacy system.
Wow.
Yeah. Owning your own car, legacy system.
Wow.
Using cash or a credit card, legacy system.
So now what are you going to use?
They want it to be all smartphone-based payments like they do in India now, because India, like a year or two ago, eliminated almost all currency in circulation and no one there has credit cards. So they all had to adopt this mobile wallet, digital wallet, which is really similar to the stuff they put out in that coronavirus relief bill, the digital dollar and all this stuff that they were sort of putting in there.
Yeah, what was in that relief bill? What was in that bill? What are they doing? What are they building in there? What are they doing in that bill?
Well, I haven't read it all. It's apparently several thousand pages. Yeah. But considering at the time they passed it, after the crisis was exploding, they had that prepared well in advance.
Right.
Those type of bills, just like the Patriot Act, they don't write them in a couple days and say, here, sign. I mean, right on 9/11, the Patriot Act was ready to go. And I think this bill is the same. And like I said, all these people last year were making these plans, and they were simulating pandemics too. Crimson Contagion. That was a 19 federal agency, 12 states, a bunch of private companies gaming out a pandemic in the U.S. 4 times last year from January to August. And they had one day on the last exercise or the last simulation, which was lasted 4 days. The entire third day was the Secretary of the Treasury and Finance. And I think that's where that bill came from.
So they want everything like China on your smartphone. They want everything, they want everything basically.
Yeah, they don't even want people to have laptops. They want it all on the phone.
Why?
Everything on the phone.
Why not laptops? Are they harder to trace or nobody knows?
I guess they just want everyone's life on the phone. That's pretty much where it's going. They're phase all this stuff out and make it all the phone.
All the phone.
It's crazy. I will send you this so you see I'm not making this up.
I don't believe you're making it up.
All this stuff mass surveillance is awesome. It's a killer way to train artificial intelligence. They say it's awesome that in China people are using the police use voice recognition technology to arrest people before they commit crimes.
Yeah. Oh boy. Before they commit crimes.
And this commission is supposed to give the recommendations to the government about how, from this national security point of view, how to maintain an advantage over China. And this is what they're saying. And someone had to do this Freedom of Information Act request to get it. And this is like the only document produced by that body they got. And like I said, this is